Gumball encounters many relatable problems in his daily life, and his adventures in Elmore can show a lot about how the world really works. In this video, we're going to break down how Gumball actually teaches us about inflation. In the pizza, Gumball's family takes Larry for granted. As everyone knows, Elmore only functions because Larry gets up for work in the morning and works dozens of jobs. When he felt unappreciated, he quit, which destroyed Elmore in 20 minutes. In this clip, Gumball explains how without Larry, there was no business, which ruined the economy and drove up prices due to inflation. He explains that the $100 bill is essentially worthless, and in response, Larry says that the pizza now costs $9,000. The concept that Gumball is explaining here is how a worse economy makes the currency of that economy worth less, with goods and services flowing because Larry kept everything running. But once he quit, production stopped, businesses shut down, and there was nothing left to spend money on. The demand for basic goods stayed the same, but the supply collapsed, and with no functioning economy to back the currency, prices skyrocketed. In the real world, this is how inflation can spiral. When economic output drops but the money supply stays the same or grows, each dollar buys less. Venezuela is a real-world example of this. After its economy collapsed due to political instability and a drop in oil revenues, the government continued printing money to cover its deficits. But with fewer goods being produced, that extra money just chased a shrinking supply. The result was hyperinflation. By 2018, inflation hit over 130,000%. And prices doubled nearly every few weeks. You can see in this graph how the value of the Venezuelan bolivar fell off a cliff, while the price of everyday items soared, like a roll of toilet paper costing millions. Larry mentions accepting payments in uranium, antibiotics, and melee weapons. While money is worth less than before in Elmore, these survival tools have become an essential part of living in this apocalyptic version of the town that makes them valuable and worth trading for goods like pizza. This mirrors how, in real crises, barter systems sometimes re-emerge. During Venezuela's collapse, people began trading goods directly, things like flour, fuel, or medicine, because cash had become useless. Similarly, in the early months of COVID-19, companies like Clorox or 3M saw their stocks spike because they produced disinfectant, gloves, and masks, items that became much more essential overnight. When supply chains break and people panic, the economy reshuffles around whatever is most necessary for survival. So we've seen how economic collapse can drive inflation by disrupting supply. But what about inflation that builds more slowly, across generations, as the value of money erodes over time? In The Parents, the Watterson family goes grocery shopping. Nicole says that she got an advance on her next quarter, meaning her job gave her an actual quarter. So she took the opportunity to get food from the grocery store. When Anais realizes they are only shopping with a single quarter, she jokes that the only place they're going to be able to buy groceries with that little money is the 1860s. Anais is accounting for year-over-year inflation, implying that over 150 years ago, a quarter would have had a lot more buying power. Her statement is actually very accurate, as the average inflation rate for the United States has been about 3% per year, which means that a quarter from 1860 would be worth over $7.50 at the time this episode aired. And in the 1860s, standard groceries were much cheaper. For example, a loaf of bread costed around 5 cents, a dozen eggs costed 20 cents, and a quart of milk costed 6 cents. Moments later, Nicole finds a pallet of corned beef from the 1960s, which cost 20 cents. While groceries were cheaper in the 1960s, the low cost of this pallet can't only be attributed to inflation. A cost of a single can of corned beef today is around $3, but 60 years ago, it was about 50 cents per can. The increase of 500% is staggering, and that isn't even all that long ago. That was when Kennedy was president, the space race was in full force, and your grandparents were in school. 50 cents per can though isn't close to 20 cents for the whole pallet, so I think we can assume that Larry marked the price way down in hopes someone would buy a 60-year-old canned meat. While inflation usually refers to rising prices in the economy, value can inflate in other ways too. Sometimes it's not about how much something costs to make, but how much someone is willing to pay for it. In The Watch, Richard gives Gumball a pocket watch that's been passed down through generations of Wattersons. He tells a convoluted story about how the watch changed hands over the centuries, mostly through interactions with the rival Finkelheimer family. Despite the dramatic build-up, Gumball immediately dismisses the watch as useless and tries to pawn it off on Darwin, who eventually gives it away to an old man who ends up being Marvin Finkelheimer. After their efforts to retrieve it fail, they confess to their dad, only to find out he never cared about the watch in the first place and was just trying to get rid of it. The watch seemed like just a sentimental object tied to family history and the guilt of tradition. After the dust settled with Marvin, the Wattersons watched an episode of an antique appraisal show, where the same model of watch is revealed to be one of only 2 ever made, valued at $700. Everyone watching gasps, including Marvin, who suddenly realizes how much money he's going to get when he sells it. This moment shows a different kind of inflation. Nothing about the watch changed physically, but once its rarity was revealed and the market price established, its perceived value skyrocketed. With only 2 watches in existence, even a moderate level of interest can send the price soaring. In the real world, this is how collectible markets work. Whether it's vintage watches, limited edition sneakers, or Pokemon cards, rarity and hype drive prices far beyond the object's original value or utility. A good example is the surge in prices for luxury watches from brands like Rolex and Patek Philippe. Some models that retailed for a few $1,000s now resell for tens of thousands, not because they got any more functional, but because supply is limited and status demand is high. And as with the watch in Gumball, value can appear seemingly out of nowhere. One minute it's a dusty old heirloom no one wanted. The next it's a 4-figure collectible. Inflation isn't just about more dollars chasing fewer goods, it's also about perception. Sometimes all it takes is a new context for an old object to become suddenly, shockingly valuable. We just saw how something seemingly worthless can become valuable through rarity. But what happens when value inflates purely because of exclusivity? When something becomes expensive not for what it does, but simply because not everyone can have it? In The Gift, Gumball and Darwin try to buy Masami a birthday present. After eavesdropping, they hear her mention a McGraves, and assume it's a must-have item. Within seconds, word spreads and chaos erupts at school, with students sprinting to the mall like it's Black Friday. When Gumball and Darwin finally reach the art store, they ask for a McGraves, only to learn it's an artist. Larry shows them an original painting titled $4,000, which actually costs $20,000. This moment pokes fun at the art world's strange economics, but it's also smart commentary on perceived value. The painting's worth isn't tied to how useful it is or the materials it's made from. Its price is inflated purely because of reputation and exclusivity. These types of inflation, based on hype, scarcity, or social status, can make prices feel unpredictable. But sometimes inflation happens in cycles we can anticipate, like the sudden spikes around holidays and seasonal events. In the episode The Lie, the Watterson kids invent a new holiday called Suzzletag to cheer themselves up during the January blues, which starts as a joke quickly snowballs into a town-wide celebration, complete with traditions, decorations, a made-up mascot, and holiday shopping. When Richard and the kids are checking out, Larry tells them that 5 Suzzlewursts cost $775. Richard mentions milk, and Larry says that costs $189.99 a bottle. This is actually a real-world phenomenon. During holidays or seasonal events, prices often spike, not because the products change, but because consumer demand rises, and sellers know they can charge more. It's inflation driven by timing and expectation. The product stays the same, but the value inflates because it's wrapped in holiday hype. This is why we use the basket of goods to measure inflation. Instead of focusing on one overpriced sausage, economists track the average prices of a wide range of everyday items like food, clothing, housing, and transportation over time, not just during special events, but across the whole economy. From economic crashes to holiday markups, from antique watches to overpriced sausages, Gumball shows us that inflation is everywhere. It's not always caused by what you'd expect. Inflation isn't a simple, one-dimensional concept. It can come from economic collapse, like in Elmore or Venezuela, where supply crashes but money keeps circulating, causing prices to spiral. It can come from the slow, steady erosion of money's value over decades, as with everyday groceries and how far a quarter goes. And sometimes it can even come from perception and scarcity, where value inflates beyond practical use, like with watches or art. But for most people, inflation is about the cost of living going up over time, tracked carefully through that basket of goods, because that's what really impacts your day-to-day life. Understanding these different layers can help you make a better sense of headlines and your own wallet. And as Gumball's adventures show us, inflation might sound complicated, but it's really about how value and money move through a community, whether it's Elmore or the real world. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you want to see more of this type of content, and I'll see you in the next video.